Welcome to Animals to the Max. I'm your host, Corbin Maxey. This show is about animals and the people who dedicate their lives to them. And welcome everybody back to another episode of Animals to the Max. I am your host, Corbin Maxey. Thank you as always for taking the time to listen to the show. All right, folks, we are going to cut into the chase. We are back with a new Animals to the Max episode, and I'll tell you what, this week it's going to be really controversial. We're going to be talking about zoos and aquariums and why they matter. And, you know, let me tell you, a lot of people have many opinions, and these days with social media, everybody, you know, and their mom and their grandmother and their dog have a voice on social media, seriously. And there's a lot of opinions out there, and there's a lot of misinformation out there, and so what we decided to do, we really wanted to address some of the controversies regarding, you know, zoos and aquariums and the work that they do. And so I teamed up with my really, really good friends, Chris and Angie from the All Creatures podcast. And this was actually, Chris reached out to me and he wanted to do a roundtable discussion. Now, if you remember, our last roundtable discussion was when we decided to talk about trophy hunting. And, you know, that, of course, is extremely controversial. And it turned out to be one of the most popular episodes to date on Animals to the Max. People were really interested to hear and kind of listen to like a scientific view of trophy hunting, you know, this and that. And so we kind of took the basis of that and we wanted to talk about zoos and aquariums. Looking at it as scientists, we wanted to look at the facts, the data, to see if, you know, zoos and aquariums really do help animals out in the wild. And so we had a roundtable discussion on the All Creatures podcast. And so I wanted to share the episode with you. You know, I really feel like in this day and time, it is important that we address some of, you know, these topics that can be controversial. And I'm going to be honest with you, oh my goodness. So I grew up, as you know, if you've listened to the show, you know I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Roby Creek, Idaho. And I always make the joke, population for me, my mom, my dad, my sister. You know, there wasn't much to do, of course, you know, up there. And I remember going, you know, like taking the trip into town and going to our local zoo, by the way, which is very, very tiny. I think it was only like 10 or 11 acres at the time. But even going to that small zoo, I remember, I mean, it was just like going to Disneyland, being able to see animals up close, like exotic animals from around the world that I never would have in a million years, you know, have seen living up in the mountains, like actually seeing these exotic animals. I just have really, really many fond memories. I also, as a kid, went to zoo camp. I remember feeding the moose bananas, which I don't even think that's the thing they could do anymore these days. But I have very, very fond memories of going to the zoo. And, you know, there are people out there who are against zoos. There's many of them. There's also a lot of people are for zoos. But I feel like with this, and I encourage everybody, if you are anti-zoo, anti-captivity, please listen to this episode with an open mind. If you are for zoos and you're excited to hear this roundtable discussion and, you know, kind of go over the facts, you're going to love this episode, I promise. I do want to say something, and I'm just going to throw it out there. Zoos and aquariums, and by the way, when I am talking about zoos and aquariums, I am talking about accredited zoos and aquariums, accredited meaning by the AZA, or the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. They donate a lot of money to conservation, okay? So to date, the AZA, those organizations, those zoos and aquariums, donated nearly $250 million to conservation. Think about that. And that all directly goes back to saving animals in wild habitats. And folks, I'm going to tell you what, for a lot of you out there who say, you know what, zoos shouldn't exist, all the animals need to be out in the wild and be free, that's great. That's a beautiful thought. I mean, yes, that's amazing. But you need to wake up, you need to smell the coffee, because the wild right now, it is not a very happy and secure place. We have habitat destruction, we have poaching, we have a million things against animals right now. And you know what accredited zoos and aquariums are doing, they really are bringing awareness to people and to millions of people every single day. And you listen to this fun fact. Thank you, Angie, for helping me out with this. But over 700 million people 700 million people around the world visit zoos in the United States. It's the #1 recreational activity. If you put all the NFL games combined, all the people that go to see those, I mean, that's nothing compared to the amount of people who actually go to zoos. And so please just keep that in mind with this discussion. I really, really hope you enjoy it. And as always, if you haven't already, please make sure to rate the show on iTunes or whatever podcasting platform you're listening on. And if you love animals and you want to learn more, I encourage you to subscribe to the All Creatures podcast with Chris and Angie. It is, I mean, they're one of my favorite animal podcasts, and I love them. I always say, like, I feel like they're family, even though we've never even met. We've just had, multiple conversations over Skype, and we've released those conversations, and they've been pretty popular. So I hope you enjoy the conversation with Chris and Angie from the All Creatures podcast. As always, if you have any questions, I want to hear it. If you're out there and you just want to send your feelings my way, you can email me directly at info@corbinmaxey.com. But with that said, I hope you enjoy my interview and roundtable discussion with Chris and Angie on the All Creatures podcast on why zoos matter.
Welcome to the All Creatures podcast. This is Chris.
And I'm Angie.
And I'm Corbin.
Hey, there he goes. Hey, welcome, Corbin.
What's a little delay? How's it going, guys?
It's good. And we are so excited. This has actually been in the works for a few months. Corbin's been really busy, so we have scheduled this kind of roundtable again. I think we need to do this every year. And can you believe it's almost like, Corbin, you launched, your podcast came out about when ours did. And can you believe it's been a year and a half almost? Isn't it insane?
I can't even believe it. I can't. Yeah. And you guys are well into your episode 70s. I feel like a slacker over here. Like, I get notifications. You guys are busting them out like crazy. I'm like, keeping them up on a weekly basis. So congratulations.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, there's two of us too, so it helps.
Yes.
Angie cracks a whip on me, and I got to get out there and hustle, and then I crack the whip on her. So, but yeah, thanks for joining. Thanks for joining us.
He's actually a softie. I always text him, I cannot meet tonight, or I can't talk tonight. And he's always like, okay. So,
well,
he's
and I have to say something though. Thank you for being lenient with me, because what the audience doesn't know is I actually asked them to postpone this another hour because I was working on an alligator exhibit, and I was like, that's a great excuse though, right? I mean, it really is. Like, who in the world texts you and says, hey, I'm sorry, we're working with a 10.5-foot alligator. Can we postpone this just, an hour? Yes. And Angie's like, that's fine.
Yeah.
Well, I had two little baby alligators that were giving me a hard time tonight going to bed. So I actually appreciated your text, because I was not ready to go myself. Yeah. Life, it keeps us busy, but I'm so happy that we all get to be here today and just hang out and have another roundhouse coffee or tea, or I think we were all drinking bubble water because we're super fun and boring.
Yes.
The most masculine thing. Yeah, we need to do this over beer sometime, actually. That'd be fun. Like, I felt like I know you so well and we've been friends for years, but we've never actually met in person. It's the craziest thing, the internet and podcasting. I love it.
It is. We need to do like a live podcast in New York or something. I don't know. Or in Idaho. Yeah. At Corbin's Ranch.
Yeah.
That'd be fun. All right, so let's jump into it. So we brought Corbin. We asked Corbin if he wanted to do this, and we want to really with this one. This is something Angie and I, from the very beginning, have felt so strongly for, and that's really to discuss. And from our perspective, and again, Angie and I are not paid by any zoos. This is our passion project. We're
they won't hire us. Just kidding.
No, they won't hire us. I'm trying. But
no, I used to work. I was a zookeeper for years.
Yes,
but
no longer. No. We have no financial incentive, right? And we haven't.
Unfortunately.
Hold on. Don't shoot us in the foot yet.
They should be paying us. But, we wanted to bring Corbin on because, zoos, aquariums, and really what Corbin does, animals used for, entertainment purposes, but more importantly, education purposes. And so this is a term I know Angie and I have used before. We call it edutainment, using animals to capture imaginations, to get people excited, and then educate them, because that's what you do, Corbin. I mean, you educate millions.
Yeah, and thank you for that intro, because I bet people are listening like, wait, who's Corbin again? Like, what's going on? So thank you for actually explaining what I do. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I completely agree with you. So, I take my job so seriously regarding, when I'm on these national shows using educational animal ambassadors. So I'm excited to dive in this with you for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you can give a quick background for the audience that doesn't know or didn't hear your interviews from last year.
Yeah, that'd be great. So my name is Corbin. I'm almost 30. My God, I feel so old. But I have been working with animals on television for 15 years now. And so I got my start on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. And it's just like kind of a long story. And you can go back. You guys actually did a great interview. I loved when you both interviewed me. Last year, you could find that in the All Creatures interview, but I got my start on The Tonight Show at 14. I started in animal rescue and have since basically pursued my passion. So now I'm the number one, I'm so excited, you guys, the number one animal and studio expert for the Today Show. And the reason why I'm so excited, I know it sounds like I'm bragging, but I've worked very, very hard, decades of just touring and educating people just to get that spot. And so to have a spot on the number one morning show to tell a few million people about animals and get people excited, that's like my passion. And so that's where I'm at now. And so, And so I'm, like I said, pursuing a career in television, hopefully one day to have my own show.
Yes. And then we'll come on. You'll meet us.
There you go. That'd be great.
But I have a face for radio, so I don't know.
No, you guys are both good looking. No, I'm happy because I didn't know what you both looked like because I was a fan of the podcast last year. And I thought, I hope these guys can, average up to what they sound like. And you both are very good looking people.
That might be the nicest thing anybody has said to me this month. So thank you.
Yes.
This month.
So
that's funny.
Just to give some more background. So, I think one of the questions we ask is has society's views changed over animals in confinement or animals under human care? Is the public more caring? Do they care more now today? That's a question. I think stories like the movie Blackfish, things that happen with Hombre at the Cincinnati Zoo, other incidences that are spread over social media. So how does that put zoos in a highlight, or a spotlight? And I think, the question is, what exactly are zoos and aquariums doing? Does the data back them up? Are they really doing conservation? Are they making an impact in the world? So that's really how we were setting this whole thing up. Now, I will ask, if you are against zoos, aquariums, or animals used for entertainment, just please listen throughout the podcast and then give us some feedback because we do care what you think,
was
right?
really, for me, it was interesting to kind of look around and read some blogs and articles and try to understand what the critics are saying that aren't fans of zoos and aquarium or animals under human care. Because obviously, full disclosure, because I was a zookeeper for years and really got behind the scenes and understood what it was like to work at an accredited zoo. And we're going to discuss that, of course, in this podcast, because not all two zoos or aquaria are created equal by any stretch of the imagination. And so, but because I worked at an accredited zoo, which is the highest standard of care, I am a little bit biased in the fact, or I'm a lot biased in the fact that a lot of what the naysayers are saying against zoos, or the dung that they're flinging, if you'll pardon the pun, I love puns, is in order to be open-minded, I want to try to understand it and see if there's some validity to it or why they might think this, and then also show data or facts about why that reason or the reason they might like to try to get people to open their minds that, of course, I guess are naysayers. It was my driving force behind doing this podcast today.
Yeah, and that's great. And really quick, I guess I should add that with my job working on shows like the Today Show and other late night programs, I work firsthand with AZA accredited zoos, and I have a lot of experience, with their protocols, the permitting, just everything. And I also was a spokesperson for the AZA at one point in my career. So I'm excited to kind of use that experience as well to add to the conversation.
Yeah, and in case we didn't mention it, AZA stands for the American. Why do I always screw this up?
I guess we should say what the hell the AZA is.
Clearly, I don't know after 20 years. I just always say AZA. It's like that for me is a word. That's a noun. It means it carries a lot of weight.
The Association for Zoos and Aquariums.
Thank you, Chris. This is why you're my partner in crime.
You have mom brain. We know what that is.
On fire. It's like 9:00 at night here.
But let me just say this too with Corbin here. Corbin, what you're doing is so critical, I think, for a better planet. Like if I go back to my childhood, long time ago, but Jack Hanna, Steve Irwin, these are the folks that, and I'm going back to, the 80s, way back when, but I'm watching those nature shows, watching people like Joan Embry on the Tonight Show, as a kid seeing that and being like, oh my God, and capturing my sense of wonder. Right. So, I mean, I don't know if Angie or you have experiences like that as a kid too, but really what you're doing, especially for younger, kids or teenagers, is you're capturing their imagination. And then someone like me, for the rest of my life, I said, hey, I'm going to dedicate my life to animals and studying them and helping them. Right. I mean, I'm sure you all have similar stories like that.
Absolutely. And I grew up in the country, so I had access to a lot of different farmyard animals, if you will, and especially riding horses. So I had that intimate interaction with animals right from the very get-go, and I knew it was my calling, if you will. But what I didn't realize, because I lived in the country and grew up with the animals, a lot of my friends did, I didn't realize that a lot of kids in bigger cities, in lower income areas especially, do not have access to anything of that sort. And being at the zoo, the Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago, where I worked for years, and seeing the amount of education work that they do with their zoo ambassadors and all the programs that they go out to the schools in obviously all different types of incomes, but especially lower income, where students and children have never seen an animal, and working with them in their schools. And then, of course, because Lincoln Park Zoo is free to all the school buses of children that would come in and just learn, and their eyes would open. And my motto has always been, I don't care where you live or where you're from or what your income is. I love being an animal ambassador, and I respect so much what Corbin does, and what a lot of different zoos are doing, because you never know who's going to be the next Jane Goodall, who you're going to inspire, or you as an educator and the animal as an ambassador are going to inspire to make significant, Nobel Peace Prize winning, if you ask me, contributions to saving animals. So that's, for me, what moves me about why I keep doing this podcast at 9:00 at night when I have mom brain.
Yes. I know. I think that's a common theme of like recent interviews I've done with, wildlife professionals and experts around the world, is one person can really make a difference. And I even think with our podcast, with your podcast, All Creatures, or my podcast, Animals to the Max, if we could just change one person's perception about animals or get some people excited, I think it makes it completely worth it. Like our job's done. And so I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. And it's and collaborating too is incredible, because right now we're facing a huge crisis. I mean, huge. Just this week in the news, 6 mass extinction, species dying off at an incredible rate. We're going to talk a little bit about the vaquita porpoise. They're down to 10. When we covered them over a year ago, there was 30 plus. Now they're down to 10 and they're gone. Like they're pretty much written off.
Yeah.
So they're dead. That species is going to be gone here pretty quick. So, there's habitat destruction, pollution, human population, trash in the oceans, climate change, poaching, on and on and on. So, when you look at the role of zoos, aquariums, and education, we need to really get our message out there. So all of us need to collaborate. All of us need to be booming like this is going on, and these animals need our help.
Okay, I have to tell you all something listening. Angie accidentally hit something on her computer to where we could see her notes, and I am so impressed with all the notes you take for your podcast. Take a look at my notes right here. So I just come with the gift of gab. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, good, then you can read off of them and we can bounce.
What I was going to... Yeah, no, but what I was going to say is that my favorite fact is over 700 million people worldwide. That's worldwide visit zoos, which it's insane. It just blows my mind. It's the number one recreational activity here in the United States, and I would bet probably the world.
And then, Corbin, even looking at just AZA, so the the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. I've got it. Their educational program. So this is what things that are going to happen inside their zoos. They talk about everything from connecting to nature, habitat loss, human-wild conflict, careers. So that's always good for kids that go to zoos. Sustainable living. They have tons of facts and information about how to have more of a green lifestyle. And I mean, the amount and energy in education is just staggering. And a recent survey of a zoo and aquaria in the AZA shows that there's 2.6 million hours of service when you combine the zoos, and almost close to 3,000 education programs. So it's just amazing. And that's just inside the gates. So that's what they're doing. And everybody, and I'm sure most people are familiar that a lot of zoos hold camps and other daily activities that are phenomenal. But the other thing,
I love
too,
Zoo Camp. Sorry to interrupt. That was so.
Oh no, I cannot wait. I know. There's one here at a conservation center here in Florida, and I'm like, I'm too old to go, but I cannot wait till Xander can go. I'm super excited. I checked the age limit, and yeah, they didn't want me, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, these programs. The thing I think that's often forgot about too is that they're educating beyond the zoo gate. So they have offsite, like the ones I was talking about in Chicago, offsite education programs from AZA accredited zoos reaching more like 3.5 million people and close to 750,000 different individual programs at different schools. And once again, these are all off-site, like zoos going out and doing education. And so I just think it's really staggering when you look at the numbers, because people are just like, oh, zoos are educating, or if the naysayers, oh no, they're not. It's like, no, if you look at the numbers, I mean, we had Corbin's big statistic of 700 million people going to zoos annually. They're reaching millions and millions of those through education programming. And going back to what we had originally talked about, that's getting kids excited about animals and nature and science, which, I mean, obviously all three of us are going to argue that animals are the most important, but I think science and STEM type careers, we need a ton more of that, especially in the United States if we're going to be competitive in this day and age. So if you can get, and some of Chris's research showed that just getting students talking about animals and doing behavioral research, they have a more positive, or what were the results of that paper, Chris? That they had a more positive, they did better. They liked it. They did better at school.
Thank you for clarifying that for me.
They got more excited about science, and we got them early. Right when they started college, we had them studying animal behavior, and they just fell in love with it, and they got really interested and want to pursue science careers. So we need to do that with the younger generation. Yeah. So Corbin, I mean, I ask you this real quick, because we're on this topic of education. I mean, how many millions, you guys get statistics on the shows you do. I mean, how many millions do you think you've reached in just the last few years?
Oh, I actually have another statistic. Give me 1 second. Okay. I actually have this. This is great. Hold on.
Yeah.
I can't believe
numbers. We love numbers.
Yeah, so do the shows.
Yeah.
It's all about numbers. All right. Here we go.
All right. What do we got?
I have it. So basically, after every time I'm on the Today Show, I get a nice little email from a media monitoring company, and they actually help us out. And basically, they're able to let us know how many people are able to watch or who watch the segments. And so, like, they'll give you the Nielsen audience is well over 3 million people.
Wow.
The publicity value is $432,000. The calculated ad equivalency of what I do, like for education, is 144,000. And if you want the exact number, let's see, we just did a recent one. We had 3,309,183 people view that segment that I did on the Today Show for a couple minutes. So,
wow.
And they, like I said, I can look at all the data right here. So it really is invaluable. I mean, just regarding the amount of people that you can reach through television, even though I know we are switching into more of a digital age, you're still reaching tons of people around the nation.
Right.
Yeah. And And I think that's the thing is like there's this huge reach that's possible, obviously through zoos or through animal education ambassador type programs. But of course, being a critical scientist, I'm always wondering, well, does that mean you're actually connecting to the kids? And if you are connecting, is it helping? And that's why I love Chris's study to show that these young college kids did have more of an interest in a STEM type career after they ended the class where they learned about animal behavior and collected some behavioral data than when they started. And looking at some of the research, a gentleman named Brian Ogle in 2016 published an article in Universal Journal of Management looking exactly at more the specific question. And a couple different aquariums, they put an interactive in that wasn't there. So that's where an interactive in zoo language is basically something that gets people talking about the animals. And I think this is one of those touch tanks where you could touch a stingray. Those have become kind of popular. And so they did a lot of polling of the people before they interacted with the animal and had animal ambassadors, the stingray ambassadors, and then after. And what the article reports is that having that aquatic interaction increased how knowledgeable the individuals felt about aquatic wildlife, and also increased the likelihood that these participants would take action to protect the wildlife.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that to me, and granted, this is one study and at a couple different aquarium, one quote unquote edutainment animal interactive, but we need more of that. And of course, studies take money and zoos don't have money. And obviously university people like me, we don't have a lot of money. So it's hard to get these studies done because I think the goal is to always be more effective with our education and be more efficient is the goal. But I definitely would have to say that hands down, zoos and aquaria educate a lot of people. The accredited ones do it really well. And it seems to be that there's definitely evidence that is their interactions at zoos are influencing how they think about animals and how they want to conserve them in the wild, period.
I go back to, I grew up in Southern California and San Diego Zoo. That was my zoo. Always went to the San Diego Zoo. I still to this day remember as a teenager walking through one of their exhibits and it showed what the rainforest produces, as far as medicines and technologies and all that stuff. And then next to it's like, oh, look how important the rainforest is. The next walkover display was they're all going away. And this is, in the 80s, 80s. I'm not old, but this is a long time ago. So that had an impact on me as a young man, as far as that message. I still remember it to this day. And I just went back to the San Diego Zoo a few months ago. And I went to the LA
that
Zoo.
interactive still there?
No.
They've since put a gift shop up. No, I'm kidding.
This is like 30 years ago. It's, the San Diego Zoo's done a pretty phenomenal job on their exhibits. And, but anyways, it was just as a young person, it was so impactful to me. And here I am today spreading the conservation message. So it does have that influence, because the critics are saying zoos and aquariums are doing nothing for animals. It's all exploitation.
Correct.
The conservation message is bogus. So and then of course we're saying that's not true. Millions of dollars in research and things like that. But I think one of the things I really wanted to cover today too was kind of really quickly, me, I like to do natural history and go into the history of things.
I'm so excited for this.
I do. Yeah. Does Corbin? See, I don't think Corbin heard our latest episode. I don't know if Corbin knows the largest bird on Earth. Do you remember, Angie?
Yes. Wingspan? Wingspan?
No.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Biggest. Just the biggest.
The ostrich.
Yes, the weight being sick.
Or the moa? Sorry, go ahead.
No, ever.
All I don't remember the name, but it was 1,600 pounds. And
what?
That scared me.
Oh my gosh!
The elephant bird.
The elephant bird. See, I have Napoleon, my pet emu, and he's 6 feet. And anyway, they're so impressive. Yeah. That's a really big bird. Okay, very cool.
Yeah. Elephant bird that just took over the MOA last September. But research. So anyways, I love this history stuff. It is crazy. You're reading the history of zoos. It dates back 2,500 years. Animals were kept, under human care. It's horrific to think about, but you think of Rome, the Colosseum, how they were really, that's horrible. And that was 2,000 years ago, right? And, some people think, this idea of conservation is just something recent that zoos have come up with because they've taken some public pressure. And that is absolutely not true. It's absolutely not true. Because this is really eye-opening for me. Zoos, as humanity has developed in the last few hundred years, zoos were originally, or menageries, were for royalty, right? King of England, Queen of England, France, all that. Status of wealth. They had these animals, but they were not shown to the public. In the 18th century, so 1700s is when zoos really started, and they started showing off these collections to the public. So, we're going 250 years roughly. And even then, the public was against mistreatment of animals.
Really?
Abuse of animals. It wasn't like, look how cool this is. Oh yeah, they were. It's so, you read this history, and the public shaped what zoos are today, really, over 200 years. In the 1700s, there was a German philosopher. He wrote about humans having a moral sensibility to care for these animals and not exploit them. So people have cared. This isn't something just in the last 20, 30 years. This is the last few hundred years. We've always loved that. Hold on, where do I want to go with that? Is that my whole
And that's it.
Sorry. Here we go. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That's a little lame.
My slide got moved down. Hold on. It's a little lame.
So good.
So,
okay.
So this idea of conservation, and so the bottom line there is the public has shaped how animals have cared for. They have been studying how to care for these animals for over 200 years, and it hasn't gone away. This idea of conservation began in like 1800, 1790s to 1810. They realized zoos are important to conserving these species. So this idea of zoos and conservation isn't recent. This is a long time ago. Angie, I found this factoid. You're going to like this one. In the 1800s, zoos started to exchange animals, not only for study, but for breeding purposes. A recent regenerative animal was spread around all over Europe in the 1850s. Do you remember?
Oh, of course. Yes, the axolotl. I do remember that.
The axolotl. 33 individuals. Let's go there. 1850s.
Wow.
Yeah. So they were spreading them around because they were studying this regeneration. Really, at the end of the 19th century is when zoos started making a big impact on conservation. So in the 1880s and 90s, I don't think people knew this, but the American bison was down to 600 animals. 600.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there used to be millions,
mass kill
right?
off.
My gosh.
There was only 600 left. Almost 60 million, I think they thought, roamed the plains of America. Because of the Bronx Zoo and the Smithsonian, they saved the American bison.
Right.
This is 1890. So Angie and I talk about more recent.
Wow.
Yeah. So conservation has always been a big thing of zoos. It is a big part of their mission. It always has been. It's just now there's more of a shift because they are so critical what's going on around the planet.
And now, Chris and Corbin, fast forward to the present day. I found a study. It's a little bit dated. It's from 2011 out of Zoo Biology. And what the authors report there is that collectively, the zoos of the entire world in 2011 or so spent $350 million annually on conservation. And if we shift to just the North American or zoos, AZA, if you will, they, as of 2017, so much fresher numbers, have spent, this is a hard number for me. $220 million in animal conservation. So just North America. Yes, the AZA.
That's just North America.
$220 million is what they're doing
And I think now I heard it's close to $250 million. So
yeah, I mean,
regarding that. So yeah.
So, and a lot of these, a lot of these projects are led by AZA member organizations, these accredited zoos, and they're in 128 different countries, and 40% take place in the United States. About 60% take place outside of the United States, all the field conservation research that they need to do. They have over 1,000 partners. They produce a lot of scientific papers and results to help make conservation managers and government agencies make recommendations about either reintroductions or how the animal moves through the land, and maybe it's safer in this area versus that area, how much room it needs, everything from basic biology to behavior to breeding to reintroduction science, things like that. So it's really taken off, and I think zoos just do they don't really give themselves enough credit, or they're not great marketers for themselves to explain what they're doing. And I think if you go to the zoo and take the time and read some signage, a lot of times they'll post things about a little bit about the field conservation that they're doing. But I think a lot of the critics don't really understand this global reach of how much money they are pouring into animals that live in the wild, and which is thus helping save them.
Well, and you have to just really quick, I want to chime in because I think they said the average person spends anywhere from 8 to 10 seconds at an exhibit. So a lot of people aren't even reading the signage.
I know.
It's hard to get a lot of messages through.
It is. And I have a lot of zoo educator friends, and that's, they pull their hair out trying to figure out how do we get people to.
Like Corbin, like when you go on these shows, how do you script your message? What are you thinking? That process of, okay, I'm bringing these species out. What I'm going to say about them, because you only do like 30 seconds to a minute each animal, or
each animal. One time I did 4 or 5 animals under 2 minutes, and I'll tell you what, that was so much fun. But it is very hard when you're on these national shows. You are pressed for time, and I actually want to ask. I just want to clarify, because everyone sends me messages. I even got some hateful people on Twitter last time I was on the show in January, calling out the Today Show, calling out Kathy Lee and Hoda for just how we're not allowed a lot of time. And the thing what people don't realize is these shows, every second you have on national television is just precious. It's worth a lot of money. And so we can't dictate the amount of time. I'll tell you what, I would love to talk, about animals for hours on the show. That's why I have a podcast.
What,
like you guys do.
Stop it.
I know, right? I haven't shut up since I got on the mic. But I was just going to say that we're not able to dictate that. But Chris, to answer your question, I pick, and I love this because I'm able to, I create my talking points and I have to give them to my producers, and they'll say, okay, yeah, yep, this is great. But I try to find the most fascinating or unusual facts. And the reason why is I want to change people's perceptions of animals. And one thing that just comes to mind for me is a very common animal, which I wish we had in Idaho, but we don't. But I'm talking about the Virginia opossum. And they eat 7,000 to 9,000 ticks in a single season, and they don't carry rabies, and they're not rats. So crazy stuff like that. Yeah. I die. Look, I'm just excited about it right now. So if I'm able to share some fun facts, or really quick to give you a sneak peek, I'm going on the Today Show next week, and we're bringing on a corvid, a black-throated magpie jay. So corvids are the family of crows and ravens. Some scientists think they're more intelligent than primates. They can problem solve, have self-awareness. They just found out crows hold funerals for family members. A scientific study. Okay, so I just wasted 5 minutes, but I'm saying that's the kind of stuff I look for. And those are some of the talking points you're going to hear me say, because that's what I want to get across to people.
Yeah, no, and it's again, education, right? You're educating 3 million people per shot, and they're tuning into that. So then they turn around. Like, this is how I used to think about our podcast. We throw the pebble in the still water, and we create those ripples, and how many people you can influence with education. So that's where zoos and aquariums are doing. So, it's critical. It's critical. Angie, kind of on the conservation thing real quick, you talk about money. We can also talk about this Noah's Ark concept that is really critical today, right?
Yes, Chris, you bring up a fantastic point. So I want to talk a lot about it.
Yeah. I'm sorry. It looks like you're going to church. Yes.
I know. No, because it's just a really important point that people don't realize as far as the genetic banking that zoos do and how much science, as a scientist, how much science is going on there. And so the reproduction and genetics is one part of it. So go, Chris. Yes, let's talk about that, because animals are being saved through science at zoos.
Yeah. I mean, just from my own experience, your experience. I mean, you were doing white rhino work. I was doing some elephant work, manatee work, and what zoos are doing, it's critical. And just so, my own research, I really care. One of the things is elephants, and the work that we were doing with Danielle. We don't know how to preserve gametes in bull elephants. We can't, go collect a bull elephant and transport his semen and stuff across, the U.S. to breed other elephants. So you actually have to transport the bull around, and that's super expensive, and it's stressful on the animal, and it's not ideal. So what we were trying to start the very beginning process of understanding how to preserve that, so we can spread genetics and maintain an emergency population of elephants, because they're going extinct. I mean, every 15 minutes, elephants poached, boom, dead. And they're on a downward trajectory, and they're going to be extinct in 50 years if we don't do something. And that's just one example. There's tons of species that, Angie with the white rhinos, northern white rhino, we know the last male died. There's only 2 females left now, right? Or 3. I don't know if the other third, the mom and the 2 daughters. And so some of the scientists that Angie was working with is working on trying to bring back the northern white rhino. And can we do that? And we only can do that through zoos, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that this genetic bank of housing gametes, in also doing artificial reproductive technologies is really critical for several species that are on their last leg with their numbers or need our help. And zoos have in the past, obviously moving forward in the future, they have goals to save, like you said, the northern white rhino, but they've also been successful through artificial reproduction and understanding more about the reproductive biology of these wildlife, have been able to increase numbers when the animals are living under human care, and they can collect the gametes and do artificial reproductive technologies, and then have the babies and then reintroduce those into the wild. And there's several success stories about utilizing gamete biology, cryopreservation, artificial reproductive technologies, and reintroductive science to take animals that were functionally extinct in the wild and bring them back. The California condor, the black-footed ferret here in North America, and then some 2 very popular overseas animals would be the Przewalski horse or the pea horse. And of course, the Arabian oryx is kind of a flagship animal that I don't think a lot of our artificial reproductive technologies were used in that, because this was actually years ago. I think they breed pretty well under human care, but they were housed at zoos, accredited zoos, and breeding genetics. So the other thing too that people don't, I think, understand is that there's a host of scientists that work at these accredited zoos. And so once again, these are AZA accredited zoos that have a lot of scientists in hand. They have geneticists, they have reproductive biologists, endocrinologists, conservation biologists. And so I'm not talking about the, pull a little roadside zoo where you pull over and get your picture taken with a white tiger cub. Don't do that. That's bad. Don't do that. If you're allowed to take a picture with a white tiger cub, that is not a good sign of a good zoo, without me going too much into the weeds there. But at these zoos, they have all these scientists. New positions are being created at all sorts of accredited zoos for welfare scientists, okay, that are investigating how to improve welfare for so many different species to make them happier, more comfortable, things like that, to anthropomorphize a little bit. And so with animals, with this science, zoos are important because they're able to explore so many unanswered questions about behavior, physiology, welfare, management, education. Zoos are actually studying, are we making an impact? Things like that. And then through this technological advances of hiring, scientists that are familiar with these, familiar with gamete production and things like that, they're always trying to improve populations especially of endangered animals. And I think that's kind of a good lead into one of the biggest things I always hear naysayers say, critics say, is that, oh, well, zoos are just going out and stealing animals from the wild. And that is 100% not true. Unless it's an animal like the Przewalski horse, where they were down to what, Chris? 30? What were they down to?
Well, done. They were down to 19, and then they were extinct in the wild. Okay. So yeah.
Then they did. They got
ferret. Yeah.
Yes, black-footed ferrets, similar. They did go out and get the last 12 or 16, I think, black-footed ferrets, and then bring them in under human care. They learned about their biology. They bred them, and over time, they were able to get a big enough, genetically diverse enough population. Scientists were studying that stuff. That's above my brain. I'm not a geneticist, but making sure that they weren't too genetically inbred, and then since then, they've been able to release a lot of the kits into the wild in the plains of North America. And now they have a viable population of, I think, like 300 or so. And it keeps growing. So that's the stuff that's going on behind the scenes at accredited zoos that aren't probably in people's ears, let alone all the scientists that are there. So it's not just, of course, there's brilliant animal managers and curators and the keeper staffs. I mean, I could go on for days. I obviously was a keeper, so I'm biased. But keepers are trained. They go to school. Most of them have to have a bachelor degree in biology or some animal-related field. So they're educated in science and animal behavior and things like that. And then the management knows a lot. But once again, as a scientist, I love the fact that they're bringing in scientists to help try to reduce biasness to improve their care for their animals, both from a medical point of view, from a welfare point of view, from a genetic point of view, from a reproduction point of view. Mm-hmm. It's actually a really exciting time in zoos in the past 20 to 30 years because they just keep growing and getting better. And there's data to show that that's happening. There's a ton of research being done.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring in Corbin here in a second, but just to add to your list. So, we talked about the bison, Arabian oryx, black-footed ferret, Przewalski horse, golden lion tamarin, Puerto Rican parrot, freshwater mussels, California condor, Kahanos spray toad, corabree frog, bongo, regent honey
I love bongos. I keep trying to get my husband to get them at his
Panamanian golden frog, Belinger water turtle, a mere leopard, and this is just not even all of them. All of these species would be extinct if it wasn't for zoos or aquariums.
Right.
They'd all be extinct and gone.
And I probably didn't even answer my question. Sorry, it's late. About do they go get them from the wild? The answer is no. They use these breeding plans, and they're called species survival plans, or SSPs. And there's hundreds of them. They're it's basically like a dating profile for the species that they're trying to save. Rather, of course, the endangered ones are very, very important, and they're very, therefore the ones that they match up with to breed is really critical because of genetics. And so these species survival plans are part of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, or the AZA, and each species is monitored closely by a taxon advisory group, or called a TAG, and there's over 500 of them in North America and more over in Europe. And so what they do is, it's like a matchmaking profile, and they put together animals that have the most genetic diversity, but also there's all this mathematical equation stuff that, like I said, is a little beyond me, but they take into account too of where the animal is, and if they are going to ship it, what does that mean for the animal? The animal's health, of course, is the number one concern, but they're doing that, and so the babies are not being taken from the wild. They are being bred under human care through these species survival plans. And that's how they're able, when these animals are extinct from the wild, that's how they're able to get the numbers up to then be released into the wild. Now, are all animals that were born in zoos released in the wild? No. That's obviously impossible. But these critically endangered ones, that is definitely the goal. And for the other ones that are on the cusp, that are threatened, or even not, they're creating a genetic bank for that day, unfortunately, if there are no more northern white rhinos, or gosh forbid, in our lifetime at the rate we're going, black and white rhinos, southern white rhinos. So
southern whites.
There's just a lot of science going on that I think people don't appreciate, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah. People don't know. They don't know it. Yeah. It's not only just education, but the research that's going on, and we can go for days. We won't. But we can go for days. But I want to bring Corbin here because, like, you were talking about international regulations. You can't, capture wild stock. It's usually regulated or banned. In the U.S., we have so many regulations. So, Corbin, I know in our interview with you talked about it, but if you can, for the listeners, so when the animals you use, but then also your own personal sanctuary where you're rescuing these animals, what kind of regulations do you have to go through?
Let me tell you, Chris, dealing with the permits, that's my favorite part of the job.
I'm sure.
Dear Lord. No, and it's actually good. I'm happy that it is established. But when you go on these national shows, these animals, you have to go through a rigorous permit process. So not only do the zoos have to make sure you have your licenses, the animals have to have updated health certificates, vaccines. The animals that I use also are not wild so animals. They're animal ambassadors that were usually orphaned, or that zoos just use for educational programs. So it's not that I team up with the zoo and then I'm like, oh, I want that leopard, and then that's not how it goes. Like, we go through a list of animal candidates who are used to people who would be comfortable. And just regarding my own animals, we have special permits for my alligators. There's a lot of stuff you go through, and it takes weeks, sometimes months. I think the animal, actually, I'm going to ask you guys this. Which animal do you think gave me the biggest headache regarding getting a permit into New York City? Which animal?
Oh, jeez.
And I've been doing this for 8 years, and I've worked with all different types of exotics.
Oh, my God. Is that snapping turtle?
No, that's a good question, but no. It was a white fallow deer.
Really?
It was a deer. Really? Her name was Taffy.
Oh, God, yeah.
Hoof and mouth disease?
Yep. Not that. It was chronic wasting disease. So that was the biggest pain in the rear to do that. That took a few months, but we were able to accomplish it. So bottom line, there's a lot of regulations, and even with the Today Show, and my producer and I are very close now. We've been working together, like I said, for 8 years. And he even told me straight up one time over dinner, like, the first thing I did, after hearing about you and after receiving your pitch, first thing I did was I looked into you. I looked in to see if you were, had a USDA license. I looked in to make sure there were no citations. Like, the last thing a show wants to do is put on somebody who's not qualified or who's using animals that are not, properly permitted or taken care of. And sorry, just to get on top of that, but, with these appearances, sometimes you have to have an on-site veterinarian there. Sometimes you'll have someone when I used to do the Tonight Show with Jay. Yeah. I also did the Tonight Show with Jay Leno back in the day, and we would have someone from the American Humane Society there. I mean, she didn't do anything, but just to make sure that, hey, that the animals are humanely treated. So.
Yeah, Corbin, you bring up some great points. I mean, the permitting alone and the time and energy that goes into making sure these animals are moved safely and that they're well cared for is just amazing. I mean, and I've never had that job, so I know a lot of my friends that are curators and stuff definitely kind of, roll their eyes a little bit back to the permitting, because there's a lot of red tape to jump through, but that's part of being one of these accredited bodies, and that's what it's self-government. I mean, because that's the thing. The reason roadside zoos are allowed to exist, and you can unfortunately take a picture with a white tiger cub, is because the USDA that governs a lot of the agricultural things here in the United States, they have care standards, but they're they're minimal, and that's where a lot of the bigger zoos got on board and said, "Hey, we want to make it harder to be a good zoo. We want to make it we want to have higher standards, the highest standards of care. And we want to keep improving those each year." And so a zoo that's accredited by the AZA, it's not like you get accredited once and then you're free and clear. The accreditation process is like a 2 to 3 day process. They do internal and external. They interview keepers. It's like intense. And
on-site inspections. If you're at a zoo and they're preparing for a visit by the AZA and they're trying to get their accreditation, it is insane.
Oh yeah, we started over a year in advance, and it's obviously the animals are the number one part of it, and how they're cared for, and what they're fed, and what their enrichment is, and who they live. Do they have mates? Do they have friends? All these kinds of things according to what their natural behavior is, and that's brings up another little side tangent, is that a lot of people at a zoo will say, "Oh my gosh, that tiger looks so sad. He's by himself." And that zoos like to follow the natural behavior of an animal, and a male tiger is a solitary animal. Just like your cats at your house, they don't want friends. Lions are an oddball. Lions like their pride. They like their friends. But tigers are like your house cat. They don't want any friends. Yep. They only want friends, during breeding season. And so it's things like that where I don't think zoos always do a lot of they don't help themselves out a lot by kind of explaining why the animal maybe lives by itself, or why it lives in the dark, or why it lives, things like that. But the zoos are always trying to do natural behavior. And a lot of this is monitored through the AZA accreditation process. And when you do get accredited, you have another inspection in 5 years. So pretty much if you work at an accredited zoo, like every 3 to 4 years, you're preparing for the next accreditation. And they are very rigorous. And that's what people that work for zoos love. Animals, they don't make any money, for goodness sakes. And most of them pretty much doing it for free.
God, no.
And so it's like they basically said, we want higher standards. We want more than the USDA. We want to be different than roadside zoos. And in the 20 and 21st century, it's just really increased. And the zoo that I worked at, every year they would do these capital campaigns and get a hold of a lot of the people that had a lot of money in Chicago to help donate. And every year they were opening new modern habitats to reduce some of the older, outdated areas, so the animals could live in larger, more natural, gorgeous spaces. So now, unless you're Disney, not every zoo can have that like right away. But all the zoos, that's what the goal is. That's what they're working for, and that's what the accredited bodies are requiring of them. And so it is. It's a really rigorous process, and none of it's willy-nilly, like you said. It can, there's a lot of thought that goes into everything that you do with an animal. There has to be, because especially in this day and age, there's a lot of eyes on you, right? There's a lot of people that are, and rightfully so, they should be.
And I want to jump in and zoos, there is some criticism of zoos. There should be, you should, and the AZA does that, and they are evolving. They have changed a lot in the last 20 years due to, social pressure and what the public wants. And like I said, this has been going on for 200 years. It's not like people just all of a sudden woke up and said, "Oh, this is terrible." Again, one of the things that people argue is, "Oh, these animals should all be in the wild."
Yeah.
And that would be awesome.
Absolutely.
It would be the ideal. I want to go to Africa and see these animals in the wild. And that's where they do belong, but there's no wild left. We're down to 25% of natural habitat before humans took over the earth, in the last couple hundred years or 500 years. So, zoos, can be open to some criticism. I mean, we all know that, I had a friend on Facebook, Ben, he's been passing me some articles on some zoos in Europe where they had some mixed exhibits, which I had concerns about, and they're certified by the European AZA that they have there. So, some zoos can do better job, and they are trying really hard, but I'm going to tell you, they are critical. And I'm going to open up a can of worms, Angie and Corbin.
Let's do it.
And
come on, if you're still with us, let's do it.
Okay, so let's get controversial just a little bit. And that's, talking a little bit about Blackfish and SeaWorld and the impact that's had on ocean conservation, because aquariums are doing a tremendous amount. We call it ex situ, so out in the wild, preserving oceans or rehabilitation of animals. I know my work in Florida, manatee rehabilitation was a big deal there with zoos and SeaWorld. But, I brought up earlier the vaquita porpoise. So just news today I read, we're down to 10. And when Angie and I covered them over a year ago, we were up to, I think, 30 to 50 is what they thought. But now they know they're down to 10. But because the film Blackfish and some animal rights organizations, it made marine mammals, it's just not palatable, for zoos or aquariums to bring them into captivity or under human care. People are so against that. So when they
had the whole safe movement to bring, they spent millions of dollars to try to bring them in.
And it just didn't work. They weren't,
They did. And when that one female died, and they were like, that's it. We can't, because of public pressure, we can't bring them in and try to do it. So they're going to go extinct.
Oh, absolutely.
They're going to go extinct. Mm-hmm. We're seeing it. We're seeing it live, and some regulations I'm reading in Canada that they're trying to pass will really have an effect not only on marine mammals, but also some of their, like the woodland caribou. They want to bring them down. There's only 18 of them left, but based on regulations in Canada, they may not be able to. Where I think, bringing SeaWorld and just kind of broaching this topic, and again, that's a whole different podcast, but so what some of the research that SeaWorld has done, and I've read some of their papers on not only killer whales, but their dolphins and other marine mammals back in the day, studying for graduate studies, that they have developed a lot of techniques that scientists can use to apply to the wild population. One of the things they did is measuring hormones in poop and urine. And now they're able to go and study, especially these killer whales in the Puget Sound area that are endangered. That pod's totally endangered. So they're out there studying, learning about them because of some research that SeaWorld's done. So, is there some criticism on zoos and aquariums? Yes. But I think you have to look at the bigger picture. The global picture that you and I have painted this past year and a half.
Right, and I think that's the biggest thing is the bigger picture as far as the world and how it all interacts and what the piece of the puzzle is, and think outside of just the little bubble of the SeaWorld in your local town and what they are doing, both like the SeaWorld here in Orlando, the amount of restoration and conservation, the money that they dump into Florida and helping save a lot of like stranded wildlife and rehabilitation of this wildlife, ocean life, of course. And it's pretty phenomenal. And then of course, educating people along the way and working with their community. But then globally beyond that, I guess my whole thing is, all right, if the argument is to go put the animals back in the wild, I just saw an article in my feed this morning that a whale washed up with 88 pounds of plastic in its belly. That was like, it was sad. It was trying to calcify it in its stomach. So, is that I don't know. That's not a good solution either. Like, even if you are, even if I could agree with you, okay, no more orcas.
And I just want to jump in because, and I'm on the fence. I interviewed, and I have not released this yet for my podcast, but I interviewed one of the main trainers and keepers, I guess, for Keiko, the famous Free Willy whale, and he was there in Iceland, traveled with Keiko, and he went through that process, and it turned into a complete disaster. And basically what happened, if you're not familiar, Keiko kept on coming back, towards people, and they tried to reintroduce him because of, activist pressure, and it turned into a disaster. Keiko ended up dying, and it was horrible. And he said it was horrible when they were trying to teach him, because all this animal knew was, he'd look at his trainers, his family, and then all of a sudden he was just left to kind of, they tried to teach him to hunt, and they did, I think, the best that they could. at the time, but I think it's very easy to say, yes, absolutely. We want to see everything wild. Let's release everything to a sanctuary back into the wild. It's not as easy as you think. And Keiko is a living example of something that we tried to do and it just did not work out and it failed. And when I talked to him, he said it could be based on borderline animal abuse for like what was going on. I mean, really though, I mean, it like,
yeah,
what a horrible way to go. And so
that was huge.
Anyway, that's my
absolutely
thought. It's a lot easier. It's a lot easier said than done. That's what my
Well, and that's the thing too. And just, these wild spaces, because of the human population, they're contaminated. And I'm obviously for animals. I want them to live in the wild. Like Chris and I mentioned earlier, if all animals could live free in the wild, then that would be amazing. But it's just, for a lot of animals, it's not safe for them. And we need the research on how to make it safer for them. And we need government policy. And it's very, very complex. I don't have the answers. I talk with conservation specialists out in the field once or twice a month. And they always, they open my eyes to just about how complex it is to quote unquote save, the Sumatran rhino, for instance.
That the Cincinnati Zoo, you just did that interview.
Yeah. And so they're working their tails off, and everybody that I've interviewed, these amazing conservation heroes that are in the field. We haven't released it yet, but I interviewed a researcher, that treks for 10 to 14 days to get to his camera traps in Indonesia, in Sumatra. And, that's not easy. And guess who partners with him? Zoos and Aquariums and other agencies in the government. None of these specialists and conservation heroes I talked to, PETA animal activists, have never given them $1, they're not helping the problem overseas. Now, granted, in the United States, I think if we put our mind to something, because of our policy is a little bit theoretically a little more democratic here. Yes, here we maybe could do it, but they tried it with the red wolf, and that's having a nightmare of a time right now. So red wolves were brought back and under human care, and thriving population, released them out to North Carolina area. And, with issues with government and landowners and things like that, we're having conflict over here under our own soil. And so I just think that, I don't know. I guess I wish all the activists or PETA would, go help. If you want to free Willie, go out to Seattle and volunteer and research and get to know the J-Pod. I forget their names of all those individuals. Help study, volunteer to learn more about them. Like, that's how you should be spending your time, instead of like beating up SeaWorld, or in my opinion, because that's going to be helpful. Like, gathering more data is constructive. Or if you could volunteer at a zoo and really get behind the scenes and see if you like it. So I think that's the thing, is that you got to think bigger picture, or go explore for yourself. And goodness knows that these researchers overseas could use help. That's for sure.
When you were talking, what came to my mind was the Leipzig Zoo out of Europe, out of Germany, and the Cat Paw Project, going back to Niagara Leonard, one of my first interviews. If it wasn't for them, they would be extinct. Yeah,
those German zoos do amazing work in Africa as well. Most zoos do amazing work in Africa as well, but that's the thing, is these. Well,
let me.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, let me give you a feel good story. I wanted to bring that up and then give you a feel good story. Oh, we have one? And one.
Good. Okay.
Yes. Because Corbin, you brought us down, man. That was
How did I bring you down? Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. So here's just one example, and there are many, and we're gonna have to wrap up soon because we'll be here for all day. So I came across the Houston Zoo. Okay, before they released their new gorilla exhibit, right? They sent a reporter from, I think, the Houston newspaper there to go to Rwanda and see mountain gorillas. And we just covered this, a few weeks ago in our podcast, how you can go to Rwanda or Uganda. That's the best place to go to see them, and to see how the Houston Zoo's programs were helping the local population. So the reporter, went and described how the Houston Zoo was supporting not only the healthcare of the local populace, but also education, which they in turn bought in to help the mountain gorillas, right? This is why they're important. Here's the money that we're bringing to your community. Here's the healthcare we're bringing. So that's just the Houston Zoo. We know Brookfield Zoo, your competitor there in Chicago, or
Sister Zoo
in Chicago, is the Sister Zoo is enhancing animal welfare. They're leading that effort. There are multiple examples across the world. The Snow Leopard Trust in Nepal that is working with locals and zoos. I remember San Antonio Zoo, walking through there. You can buy stuff from the local population in Nepal to help support snow leopards. So there are many good stories out there. And yeah, you should always, if there's constructive feedback is helpful.
Absolutely.
It's always helpful. But to attack and say, oh, they belong in sanctuaries, who's going to pay that?
Well,
nobody.
Correct. And I want to say, though, that as everything, zoos are evolving. And that has been a common theme in this conversation. But zoos are evolving. And a great example is the Detroit Zoo, which my wife's from Detroit. So I've been to the Detroit Zoo.
What?
Oh, Michigan. What's up, Michigan?
Yeah.
What? Go
That's
Jets
right.
Pizza.
You married a good Michigan
podcast.
girl. Good for you.
Thank you. But they were the first zoo to say, you know what, it's so cold here, the habitat's not big enough for our elephants, and they decided that to move their elephants to a sanctuary in California. And it was the first zoo that ever did that on ethical grounds. And I'm not saying that all zoos are going to do this, because some zoos have fantastic and beautiful elephant exhibits. I know in San Diego, where you are, Chris, beautiful exhibits, but zoos are evolving. And I think that is an important note.
Absolutely.
To put in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, and there are sanctuaries, and like, you rescue animals, right? In your neck of the woods in the United States. So there are ones out there doing great work, but it's so expensive to keep these animals. So you just can't say, take all the animals in zoos and put them in sanctuary. What does that mean? It's just another zoo. It's under human care.
Right. Well, and that's the other thing too. The sanctuaries, I don't know if they have an accrediting body, but then sometimes you get sanctuaries that do breeding that don't follow the SSP guidelines. And so it's definitely not as straightforward and easy as it sounds. And that's why I think if you're passionate enough to be an activist, or, saying really unpleasant things to you, Corbin, after the Today Show or whatever, like, I guess I would beg of people to get a little more educated, or go experience something, or maybe volunteer at a zoo, or volunteer to do field conservation. They're always looking for young able bodies or old able bodies. Anybody, they'll take whatever they can get sometimes, and to just and travel the world. It's easy for me to say here because I've been to Africa a couple times. I'm hopefully going again this fall. I just submitted an abstract. Chris and I submitted an abstract. So
what?
Yeah. So very exciting. Yes. But I've been there, and I still need to do a lot more travel in Asia and things like that. And luckily, Chris and I are making friends through the podcast with that. But I've seen that it's not not easy. It's not what people always think about it. And so I guess that would, if you're gonna, I guess understand it before you really dive deep, or maybe do a little more education, or educate yourself a little bit more. Would be my plea. I know that helped me out, because I didn't understand zoos. I mean, I studied animal zoology, and it wasn't until I actually really went behind the scenes and worked at an accredited zoo that I understood the amount of care and energy and time and regulation and love and passion and sweat and tears and no money and backbreaking work for the love of these animals, and that the animals are pretty darn happy. So yeah.
And then, Corbin, can you just, quickly talk about your experiences with the SAFE program and kind of explain to the listeners what you did there to support zoos and aquariums?
Yeah, this was great. So a few years ago, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums decided to do this giant initiative called SAFE, which stands for Saving Animals from Extinction, and basically saving wild animals and wild habitats. And in 2016, I was a spokesperson for them. And basically, it was a great partnership between Frito-Lay and the AZA, to where if you buy a bag of chips, you're basically supporting conservation, and you also get a ticket to your local zoo. And it just was inspiring kids to get involved, to get outside. And it really was a great program. And they used me. They flew me to New York, and I had to go in. I went into, had to do countless press. We did People Magazine. I had a room full of journalists ask me questions. And when you go to New York with a room full of journalists, I'll tell you what, not every one of them is a giant zoo fan. So
No.
That was fun. No, I'm kidding. That actually turned out to be great, because I had one journalist come up after me, and I also, with that program, partnered with the Columbus Zoo and Aquarium. And so I was there to talk and be kind of the face of that program. And then the Columbus Zoo was there, and they had animal ambassadors. We had like an African penguin, which was part of the SAFE program because they are endangered, which is so sad, that African penguin. But we, brought in animal ambassadors to these talks. And one of the most rewarding things was a journalist came up to me afterwards, and she said, I never liked zoos, but after hearing what you were talking about with the zoos, and after meeting the animals and realizing what they are actively doing and inspiring and getting people excited about animals, let alone the millions, like I'm talking millions and millions of dollars. That year, I think they gave $180 million, like what? To conservation, 100% of the proceeds. So it changed her mind. So I was very proud to do that. And I had a really good experience doing that. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, great spokesman for them. And, just my bottom line, Angie and I, in our All Creatures podcast, we've covered 61 species so far. We've interviewed 21 experts from around the world. This has been huge eye-opening for me, the crisis we're faced with. Each species we cover in their part of the world, there's something pressuring them towards extinction. So in my expert opinion, because I consider myself an expert, not only in reproduction physiology and animal science, blah, 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 but in conservation, getting educated. If animals were banned from zoos and aquariums, we would see a huge, huge loss of biodiversity, massive loss of biodiversity.
Yes.
Yeah. That's just,
absolutely,
that is
Chris.
The bottom line.
And my bottom line,
Oh, yeah.
of course, I agree with you and all of that, but is that I think the energy spent criticizing or making an uproar or petitioning or whatever it is. I mean, obviously it's your free right to do what you want to do. I'm not telling you what to do, but I think if we're going to save animals from extinction, we all need to actually work together. And I don't know what all the answers are at all. That's why I always like to interview some of the field conservation experts and experts at zoos and things like that to get a general idea of what's happening out there and hear what other people are saying. And because if we don't work together, I mean, we're already in trouble. Okay. Not to be too much of a Debbie Downer, but we're already in trouble. And there's tons of positive stories. And those positive stories only came about when people shook hands across the aisle, got to hear each other's story and work together instead of slinging mud or dung or whatever the analogy is. So that's kind of my plea is like, I think everybody, whether you like zoos or don't like zoos, if you're even listening to this podcast or care anything about animals, or are passionate, it's because you care. It's because you love them. It's because you like looking at them either in the wild or in magazines or in videos or at zoos. And so it's like, that's a common ground. So I don't really understand why there's so much disconnect or dissidence about why it's so bad for them to be in accredited zoos. Like, why don't we work together to increase USDA policy so people can't have white tigers in their backyards or what's that movie, The Elephant in the Room, living in horse trailers? That's legal in Texas. That shouldn't be legal.
Oh, yeah.
If people spent more energy.
Yeah, there's like more tigers in Texas. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, sorry to interrupt. There are more tigers in Texas in the wild. It's insane.
Yeah. That's a problem. And so I guess that's the thing too, is people that really love animals and are really passionate about animal welfare. Cause I think that's what this comes down to, right? Wanting the best for the animals. Well, A, they need to be alive. They need to not be extinct. And then B, let's look where the holes are. Zoos are willing to do it. Accredited zoos are trying to keep raising their bar with each other. And so let's figure out how to raise the standards for other non-accredited zoos or other entities that hold animals and things like that. That's what I think the push. And then, or even scratch that, let's try to fix the stuff out in the wild so more animals can live happily and forever after in the wild.
Yeah. And I want to say that really quick because there is a lot of critics, and I know we are wrapping up. Chris is giving me the close.
No.
Is he giving you? Is he giving you the female cassowary stare? Here, let me do it.
Deadbeat mom.
Oh my goodness. I know. No, I just wanted to say that the wild is not a good place right now. There is hardly a wild left. And the thing about it is that I just want to say out of sight, out of mind. I recently just had, someone from the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund on. There are only 600 mountain gorillas left on our planet. So when you have, what was the statistic? 700 million people around the world going to zoos and seeing animals like gorillas or iconic animals like elephants or little tiny, maybe non-charismatic animals like the golden frog, that is making a difference. And if we didn't have those animals for ambassadors, I think we'd be in a really bad situation. So I think, yes, Amen. I think it was great. I think if you put it down to it, everyone would say, oh, of course, it'd be great if everything was out in the wild and it was perfect and there wasn't poaching and there wasn't all this stuff going on, but that's not happening. So I just, I guess that's my thought.
But it's so true. It is so true. And it's, I think we're gonna have another discussion like this soon.
Yeah. Well, and Chris, we'll definitely on our show notes, we can put some links up with some references and some statistics to help anybody who wants to gather, to look at it with their own eyes and kind of read through it. And of course, we love to field questions, and we want to evolve as well. So definitely be in touch with us and let us know what your thoughts are. And because I think an open dialogue is awesome. That's where growth comes from. Slinging dung, not so much. Please don't sling dung at me. I will just cry. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. And I'm going to plead with the listeners. Share this episode. We need to spread the message because, a lot of people on Facebook, it's all in the news about, anti-vax and all this stuff. We need the truth out there. And if you can share this to your friends and family and let them know that the hard work that people like Corbin are doing and people that work in zoos and aquariums across the world, that will help them out because we need to come together or the planet's going to suffer, bottom line. So thank you.
Thanks, Corbin.
Thank you, Corbin.
It's so good for you to be here, and we appreciate your time and your energy. We know you're very busy. We are some of your biggest fans, so keep up the good work.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for all the name mentions during your episodes. I get so excited. So I'm like, oh, they said my name.
Drop it in there.
And I'll message Chris. Yes.
We're always thinking of you, buddy.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say, if you loved this show or if you want to listen to another podcast, subscribe to our podcast, please. We appreciate all the ratings. So the All Creatures podcast and Animals to the Max, check them out because it helps us out a lot. And I don't know about you guys, but I love getting podcast feedback from people like around the world. You're like, wait, you're listening?
I know. What? It's so cool.
Yes.
It's so cool.
Yeah, it is.
So thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Corbin. It is awesome. So we haven't hit Korea like you did.
Korea.
We get a couple.
I know. It's so cool. Anyway, I need to. Yeah. So.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
Bye.
Listen, learn, share. Join the movement at allcreaturespod.com.
Thanks for listening to the Animals to the Max podcast. Please make sure to hit subscribe and leave a rating. It really helps me out. I also encourage you to check out CorbinMaxey.com. You can contact me there personally, even suggest a podcast guest, or if you just want to learn more about animals.